recording. Record. All right, now first thing I have to do is pause the recording. And all right. This. Okay. Tonight's shiur is Leilu Nishmat Avimari Dov Ber Meir Ben Ruben Halevi Imi Yoroti Rachel Bat Harav Michael, and should also be for Shlema for Chanukela Bat Sarah Leah, and all of Chole Yisrael. Tonight we're going to be discussing parshat of Vayakhel, which is, if you go through it, it's almost a review of parshat Truma that we spoke about 3 weeks ago. But I'm going to focus on a couple other aspects that really do not have anything to do with the Mishkan, but do have something to do with the Mishkan. So we're going to start with a very interesting concept. We're going to start right at the beginning. In the beginning of the Torah, we are told, Parshat Breshit, we know this quote very well. We say it Kiddush every Friday night. That Hashem completes creation. Hashem completes on the seventh day Malachto, his malacha that he wanted to do. He rests on the seventh day. Mikol Malachto Asher Asa, from all of his malacha that he made. And therefore, therefore, Hashem blesses the seventh day and sanctifies it, or the word Vayikadesh, we often would translate as sanctifies. The original meaning in Hebrew, or the broader meaning in Hebrew of Vayikadesh, means something set aside for a specific purpose. Generally, we use it for something set aside for a holy purpose, a sanctified purpose, but the word is also the root of the word of Kadesha, a person who is set aside for some very unholy purpose. But that's the same root of Vayikadeshoto, that is set aside for a special purpose. Kivo Shabbat Mikol Melachto, again, the same phrase of Melachto. You'll notice I've highlighted Melachto in green because this is going to be one of the key words that we're going to focus on tonight. What is the meaning of Melachto? It plays a very prominent part in Shabbat, not only in the Torah's description of Shabbat, but also in the Gemara's discussion of Shabbat. And also, if we think about the concept of Lamed Tet Melachot, the 39 Melachot that we are not allowed to do on Shabbat, and what is the common denominator and how do we define them? And that's what we're going to try to talk about a little bit right now. Okay, again, in the Aseret HaDivrot, same exact thing, we're talking about Shabbat. Sheshet Yamim Tavod Yasita Kol Melachtecha. That during the 6 days of the week, you're allowed to do your Melachtecha, but on Shvi, the seventh day, which is Shabbat to Hashem, Lo tasa kol melacha. Again, we do not do any melacha. Often, as I said, often mistranslated as you're not allowed to work on Shabbat. But that's not what melacha means. And that's what we're gonna, as I said, we're gonna focus on. Okay. The last parsha that we read last week, before the story of the Chet HaEgel in Parshat Ki Tisa, which actually is the culmination of two and plus parashot of talking about the Mishkan. After Hashem gives Moshe all of the instructions for the Mishkan, then Hashem says the following to Moshe: Vayomer Hashem Moshe lemor, V'ata daber al bnei Yisrael lemor, achet shabtotai tishmeru. You have to observe Shabbat. Ki oti beini u'beinechem v'dorotechem. It is a sign between me and you, between Hashem and the Jewish people for all of the generations. Ladat, in order to know, Ki ani Hashem mekadishchem. I am Hashem who set you aside, who made you a special nation. It's not that we made this up. Hashem is the one who set us aside and has given us the Torah and has chosen us to be his partner in teaching the world about godliness. Therefore, we have an obligation to guard the Shabbat. Ki kodesh hilachem. Those that profane it, mot yumat, shall be put to death. Ki kol osavam melacha. Again, that word. Whoever does malacha will be cut off from the midst of his nation. Sheshet Yamim Yasam Malacha, very, very similar to what we have in the Aseret HaDivrot. 6 days you would do malacha. Uvayom HaShvi is Shabbat Raton Kodesh Lashem. Kol Osa Malacha B'Yom HaShabbat Mot Yumat. And then we have the two psukim that again we're very familiar with from the Friday night davening, from the Shabbos morning kiddush of Hishamar b'nei Yisrael Shabbat, and again Beinu ve'im b'nei Yisrael ot ki olam. The Shabbos is a sign. It is the signature, the testimony that we have, that we should always know that Hashem created the world in 7 days and rested, if you will, on the seventh. So the question that all of these bring up is, what is malacha? So now we get to this week's parsha of Vayakhel. With that introduction of that, one of the things we're going to try to do is define and understand what malacha is. We're going to come to parshat Vayakhel. And what does parshat Vayakhel begin with? Same exact concept. Okay, Vayakhel Moshe Moshe gathers all of Bnei Yisrael and he speaks to them. This is, by the way, immediately after he comes down with the second luchot, because that was the last thing we read in last week's parsha, that Moshe comes down with the second luchot. By the way, it's for those of you who are keeping track of the calendar, the second day, the day that Moshe comes down with the second luchot happens to be the 10th of Tishrei, which we celebrate, commemorate, observe throughout our generations as Yom Kippurim, the day that Hashem showed that he had forgiven Bnei Yisrael for Chet HaEgel by allowing Moshe to come down with the second luchot. The day after, Moshe gathers all of Bnei Yisrael together and tells them the following mitzvot that Hashem has given him. First and foremost, Sheishet Yamim Te'aseh Malacha. For 6 days you do Malacha. Uv'yom HaShvi'i Yelochem Kodesh. Shabbat Shabbaton L'Hashem. Kol Osavo Malacha Yumat. Almost a paraphrase of what we had in last week's parsha, but here we have something added. Lo tavaru eish b'chol moshvotechem b'yom HaShabbat. You are not allowed to burn a fire in all of your dwelling places on Yom HaShabbat. Why that's here? Great question. You can go and ask anybody. You can give all kinds of drashot about it. That's exactly what the Gemara does. Brings down a difference of opinion as to why we have a specific commandment of lo tavaru eish. If you'll go to certain places like the Karaites or the Tzedokim, they did not have any fire burning in their houses the entire Shabbat if they were observant Karaim and observant Tzedokim. They had no fire burning in their entire dwelling places for Shabbat. So they probably ate cold food and sat in the dark at night. Okay, not the way we observe Shabbat. However, as I say, there's a machloket in the Gemara as to what exactly the purpose of this pasuk is, and that's for a different time. So let's continue with our quest again. Notice the word malacha appears again, trying to understand what malacha is. We're going to digress for 1 minute, because at the beginning of the parsha, again, Moshe continues now after having told the people about the importance of Shabbat. Moshe speaks to Bnei Yisrael and gives them next command from Hashem. This is the commandment that Hashem has given us to Bnei Yisrael. Please, you should take from your midst yourself a truma, a gift to Hashem. Whoever is generous of heart, should bring it, a trumat Hashem. And the truma that we should bring, as we had at the beginning of Parshat Truma, is a list of all sorts of different materials. We have metals, zav, kesef, nechoshet. We have cloths, tchelet, argaman, talat, chani. We have sheish, and we have izim. Those are all fabrics. Then we have leathers, orot, elima, damim, verot, chashim. And we have wood, atzei, shitim. Shemen, lamoar, uvisamim. We need oil for lighting, and we need spices. Shemen, shchal, tartasamim. And then we have Avnei Shom and Avnei Miluim, these precious stones for the ephod and the choshen. Okay, so we have this list of things that we have to bring. And then after Moshe makes appeal number 1 is to the givers, the people who are being asked to give, to donate. Second is those that are being asked to give not of items, but of their skills. All of those who are wise of heart amongst you should come and make all that Hashem has commanded. So there are 2 different volunteer offerings here. One is to give a donation, to give your resources. The other is to give your talents, that are both being asked by Moshe, because both are going to be required collectively for the construction, this construction project that's going on. I thought it was just as a side, I thought it's very appropriate that we're learning this tonight when we have Wednesday night as our annual meeting and we talk about volunteering for the show. I should put a plug in for the show that you should all be, doing the best you can to volunteer, not just your time and your money and your talents also. Anyway, Ed HaMishkan. And then we have a full list of everything that Hashem has commanded Moshe, the Mishkan, the tent, the cover, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Takes the next 4 psukim where Moshe lists every single thing that has to be made. And some of them are clearly going to be delineated. Some are going to be described very, very briefly, but all of these things are going to get some mention as we go through the process. Immediately after Moshe finishes speaking to Bnei Yisrael, it says, "Vayetz'u kol adat Bnei Yisrael mifnei Moshe." They all leave. Okay, the announcements are over, and what happens? Vayavo kol ish asher nesa'u libo. All the people who now, it tells about all the people who are generosity moved them to bring a donation. Okay, so kol asher nesa'u libo v'chol nadvaru chaoto. The Torah uses 2 different expressions to describe them. Nisa'o libo, his heart was elevated, and his spirit was a spirit of giving. In other words, his spirit wanted to give within him. Heviu, they brought at Tumat Hashem. Again, what Truma did they bring? Very interestingly, here's that word again, limelechet, for the malacha of the Ohel Moed, ulechol avodato, and for all the work that had to be done, ulevigdei hakodesh. So again, we have this word malacha, melechet Ohel Moed, the work, again, not the right word, the malacha. I'll leave it untranslated. It's easier that way. We'll translate it at the end. The malacha of making the Ohel Moed and all the work that was involved with that, and obviously the malacha that was involved in making the special garments for the Kohanim. Everybody who wanted to bring, and now it gives a list of who came and what they brought. Okay, now you'll notice here on the left-hand side, I have the psukim from above where it listed all the materials that had to be given repeated, and you'll see how each of those are given. So first it says, Vayavohu anoshim al hanoshim. Men and women came. This was not a contribution where only men gave or only women gave. Everybody. I mean, again, I shouldn't say this is not politically correct, but everybody came. The women came. That's all there is. There's no other genders that I'm aware of. The men and women came. Okay, not politically correct, but that's what it is. Call the divlei. All those who were generous of heart, heviu. Again, if you look above, it's exactly what we had above. Call nadvarucho. It's a combination of nadiv lev is nadvarucho and nisa'u libo. And again, heviu, they brought. They brought chach, nezem. They brought all different types of jewelry. Chach is translated either as a pin or a bracelet or a necklace, depending on whose translation you read. Nezem is a bracelet. Nezem is a nose ring. Tabat is a ring. Kumaz is another. All of these are different types of jewelry. Kol kali, again, zahav. The gold, because of its value, is listed separately. Whoever wanted to bring an offering of gold, they brought gold ornaments, gold utensils. That's the number one thing that was brought. Now, interestingly enough, we have the anybody who had found that he had some lying around. Whoever had cloth that was already spun, the techelet again, the blue wool, the purple wool, the red wool, and the linen, and the goat's hair, all of those that were already in existence, somebody who had them brought them already finished. The and the leather skins and the rot chashim, anybody who had those, who wanted to donate them, brought them. Then it goes back and says, after we mentioned the gold separately, it now mentions the silver and the nechoshet, either bronze or brass or copper, depending on which translation you get. Heviu et Trumat Hashem, they all brought these offerings. Now here's the good one. Whoever happened to have lying around some ateshitim, again, there's that word in melechet again. For all the melechet avodah, they brought them. So you see again, the requirements, what they were asked to bring, and everybody who had some lying around or some extra or wanted to give brought it. Then, now, in addition to the people who brought something that was already prepared and ready to be used, then we have another group. These are the group that, again, there's the phrase of chachmat lev, who was wise of heart, biyadeha, with her hand to tavu. She would spin. Who knew how to spin. Obviously, probably most of the women who had to spin, they had to make clothes. They probably knew how to weave too. Vayaviu matveh, they brought their spinning at hatchelet, at hargaman v'tlashtim. So there were two sources for the fabrics. One was people who had extra lying around, and the other was the women who came and volunteered to do the spinning. And again, I don't know if they used the fabric or the cloth that other people had brought, or they brought their own. Doesn't say. But again, they came to participate in the work, not just to give a donation. Okay. Those women whose hearts were again raised up in wisdom, they were the ones who spun the izim. Rashi comments that the izim, the goat's hair that they used, was unique in because it had to be spun. It was spun from the goats while they were still alive. How they did it, I don't know. But that's what Rashi says. They didn't. It wasn't that they cut off, that they gave the goats haircuts and then spun it. They spun it right off the backs of the goats. I don't know how that happens. I don't know. I guess they had to have the special wisdom, know which ones were loose enough that they would come out without hurting the goat. I guess I don't know. All I know is that's what Rashi says. So I got to bring it down here. Okay, now the Nesiim, the leaders of the different tribes, they brought the Avnei Shoam and the Avnei Miluim, the stones for the ephod and the choshen, and they brought the bosem, the spices, and the shem and the oil for the lighting, and the oil of anointment, and the ketoret hasamim. And then, after now describing everybody who came and brought stuff, the Torah summarizes it all. Call ish v'isha, every man and woman, asher nadav libam otam. Again, that phrase, nadav libam. A very critical component to this entire thing is a spirit of giving, a spirit of generosity, a spirit of willingness to participate in the community goal and as a part of the community. It seems as if everybody was motivated, at least everybody who was listed was motivated to participate in this community activity. There weren't any people saying, I don't want to give or whatever, unless they were, we don't read about them. Okay, but it seems to imply that everybody was giving, who wanted to give. Again, Lavi, to bring l'chol hamalacha, for all the malacha, Asher Tziva Hashem lasot b'yad Moshe, that Hashem had commanded to do. The hand of Moshe, Heviu b'nei Yisrael nadav al Hashem. They all brought donations, so much so that we're going to read in a little bit that the fund drive was discontinued, but we'll get to that in a minute. Okay, so again, a couple things I want to focus on. One is, again, notice the recurrence of the word malacha, malacha, malacha throughout this chapter. We're going to see some more of it, which is one of the primary reasons why the Torah, the Gemara, wants to derive from the work in the Mishkan, from the construction of Mishkan, what malacha is, to the extent that it carries over to Shabbat and says, how do we know what we're not allowed to do on Shabbat? Well, if it was involved in, it was needed to construct the Mishkan, that's something we're not allowed to do on Shabbat. Because if there was anything that would have been permitted on Shabbat, Moshe would have said, okay, you're not allowed to build this on Shabbat or that on Shabbat, but you can do this for the building. And since there's nowhere where we find anywhere where anything was allowed to be done in terms of forwarding the work of the Mishkan on Shabbat, that's why one reason why we derive all of the laws of malacha on Shabbat are derived primarily from the work in the Mishkan. Again, we have this word running through, teaching us that this is what malacha is. Okay. Moshe again tells Bnei Yisrael, Ukara Hashem b'shem. Hashem is singled out as the lead worker in this project. Betzalel ben Uri ben Chur l'matei Yehuda. Betzalel, the son of Uri, the son of Chur, from the tribe of Yehuda. And he has filled him with the Spirit of God. So the first thing we see is that somebody who wants to come and lead projects and is willing to contribute of their time and talents to do it is obviously somebody who is filled with Ruach Elokim. He has to have a spirit of willingness to give to the community in order to participate. People don't volunteer to do work for the community unless they are motivated. I shouldn't say that never, because unfortunately we do have people who give to the community for ulterior motives. And here we're talking about people who are giving with no ulterior motive at all. And that is the way it ought to be for any community project. You are giving because you want to help the community move forward in achieving its goals, rather than because you have some other agenda. Okay. Again, Hashem has given B'Tzalel the wisdom, the knowledge, the understanding to undertake very different types of crafts. As we discussed a couple of weeks ago, there are a number of different skills here that are generally not found in a single individual. You might have somebody who's a great metalsmith, somebody else who's a great carpenter, somebody else who is a great fabric designer, somebody else who is a great leather worker, and somebody else who might be a great jeweler. But to find all of those skills that we need for all of this work in a single person, so that he is skilled enough to either do it himself or be able to coach, mentor, teach others and lead others in doing it, that wasn't something that we might not have expected such a skill set to exist in a single person. But that's what we find with B'Tzalel, and he had each of these. Yes, David. David,
is there any comment about the fact that all these things that he could do and was able to do, but he was only 13 years old?
Okay, you're already quoting a midrash by saying he was only 13 years old. Okay, yeah. we have no idea how old B'Tzalel was, and as a matter of fact, other than his involvement in this project, we don't have him mentioned anywhere else in Torah. Again, yeah, there's a midrash that says he was 13 years old, and the only parallel I can draw is King Solomon, who again at a very tender age was full of wisdom because it was a gift from God. Again, the verse here, and this, by the way, when this is Moshe telling this to Bnei Yisrael, the phraseology in last week's parsha, where God tells Moshe the same thing, is very similar. So we see clearly, I see clearly, maybe you see clearly, maybe you should see clearly, that this was clearly a gift from Hashem, that Hashem gave him these special talents for whatever reason, because he knew they were needed. He needed somebody to be the chief in charge of everything, rather than each division of workers having their own leader. In other words, if we had one guild of metalsmiths and one guild of woodworkers and one guild of fabric workers, then there would have been nobody who was going to join between them and make sure that everything tied together in the end. Example is I can give numerous examples, whether it's the boards that were wood but had to be coated with gold, or the ark that was wood that was plated with gold, or the shulchan, the table that was wood. And there was a lot of these that were overlapping disciplines. The tzitz, for example, the foreplate that the Kohen wore was gold, and yet it had it had to have a fabric tied behind it. The garments for the Kohanim, for the Kohen Gadol, with the stones, required multiple disciplines that were required to make them. So you needed somebody who could cross disciplines to make sure that, I'll have deal when, if you give the guy who makes the nuts and the guy who makes the bolts their specs, and they each make them separately, guess what? Nothing's going to fasten. I will guarantee it, because each one will say, oh, well, you gave me a tolerance of 1%, you gave me a tolerance of 1%, and they didn't add up right. They both gave you the wrong tolerance the wrong way. So if you don't have somebody pulling it all together, it's not going to work. And I think that's why Hashem specifically designates B'Tzalel in this role and gives him this extraordinary talent. So it's clearly a God-given talent. as is every talent, by the way. I think that's one of the key lessons of the Mishkan, is that we have to understand that our talents, yes, we can develop them, yes, we can grow them, but the talents themselves come from God. I mean, everything that we achieve with the talents and skills and energy that God gave us. That's how we achieve things in this world. We take the raw material that God gave us and we utilize it. Okay?
Okay.
Okay. Okay, again, excuse me, my mouse is going crazy here. Again, to be able to do in metals, Evan, dealing with stonework, dealing with carpentry. Lasot, again, b'chol melechet machshevet. This word again appearing. And here we have a very interesting word here. We have the word added to this machshevet. Machshevet, the root is lachshov, which means to think about it, to intend it. Melechet machshevet, by the way, is one of the concepts that appears in the laws of Shabbat directly from this verse, directly from this passage that talks about the concept of the work of the Mishkan was not just melacha. It wasn't just activity. And as I'm going to give you now, I'll give a translation of melacha as creative activity. It wasn't only creative activity, but it was machshevet. It was thought out creative activity, because I can create things accidentally, as we find scientists often do. But again, melechet machshevet means I intended to make this, and that's exactly what I made. I didn't intend to make something else. Wasn't looking for searching for something else. That's what I was doing. And that, by the way, is what the Gemara is going to derive ultimately, is what is forbidden on Shabbat, melechet machshevet, when I am doing something that I intend to achieve something with it, and I achieve what I wanted to do with it. That's melechet machshevet. That is what the work of the Mishkan was. In other words, it wasn't just being creative. The designers of the Mishkan were not given carte blanche to make the curtains look like anything they wanted. They had to come out specifically the way they were described by Moshe, with specifically the materials that were described by Moshe combined in the way that they were described. So it was creativity, but it was creativity according to a master plan. It was not, you can design anything you want. And that clear term of melechet machshevet, which, as I said, carries on into the laws of Shabbat, comes directly from this concept of the Mishkan being something that was designed already for them. They had to execute the design. That was their job. Yes, did it require talents and creative skills? Absolutely. But there was a limit to the creativity they were allowed to exercise. Now, the other thing that's very interesting here in the last thing we described before it leaves Betzalel is this very interesting phrase, ulahorot natan bilibo. Not only was Betzalel endowed with the ability to do this all and to understand it all, but also ulahorot, to be a mentor, teacher, guide for others. Lahorot, from the same root as Torah, to teach. In other words, he gave him the ability not just to understand it and be able to execute it, which sometimes we know that there are people who can do things, but they can't teach it to others to do because it comes naturally to them. And so Lahorot, Natan Belibo, he was able to teach others. And now it's interesting because now his deputy is appointed. Who? Betzalel's deputy, who was probably one of the most anonymous people in all of Torah, who one of those people whose name is mentioned, but if you, excuse me, somebody is talking in the background, could you please mute? I don't know who it is. Thank you. Ulahorot Natan Belibo, in other words, he gave him this, I'm sorry, and Ali Oliav, who is going to be his deputy, who is going to be mentioned as his deputy, and that's it. Again, if you ask anybody who is not about Torah, who was or isn't studying for what's the Bible contest, the Chidon Tanakh, who Aholiav ben Achisamach Mateidan was, you'll get a blank stare. However, here he is as he is the deputy to Betzalel. I say a lot more people have heard of Betzalel than have heard of Aholiav. Okay.
From the tribe of Dan, wasn't he?
Yes. Now it's interesting. He is specifically from Dan, who is one of the, who is at that point one of the sparsest tribes, and Batzalel is from the tribe of Yehudah, which is to show us clearly again that the participation of all of the tribes from top to bottom is required to do this. And that's another thing brought down by the Midrash, that these two leaders come from these two disparate tribes specifically to teach that lesson that everybody has to pull together. If you've got people pulling oars one way and people pulling oars in the opposite direction, your boat's going to just stay in the same place. So when you've got a community project, you got to make sure that everybody is committed to moving in the same direction. If not, it will never get done. Even if they are all pulling the same direction, there's no guarantee it's going to get done. But certainly if they're not, it's guaranteed not to get done. Okay. Again, Hashem filled them with wisdom to be able to do all of these. Again, it lists all the different disciplines again. And Osei Kol Malacha, not only could they do it all, they were able, they had the skills, Hashem gave them skills to Osei Kol Malacha, to do all of the different disciplines, and to do the planning of merging the different disciplines when necessary. Okay. We move forward. Now, the parsha then describes the beginning of the work. First, it says it very simply, now, B'Tzalel, Aholiav, and all of the men of wisdom, that Hashem had given wisdom and understanding to them, in order to be able to understand and be able to perform. In other words, they didn't just understand it from a theoretical perspective, they were able to execute it from a practical perspective. Both of those disciplines are required in this undertaking. You have to understand the theory, you have to understand the practice, be able to merge them and do them both. For everything that Hashem had commanded, Moshe calls B'Tzalel and Aholiav and all these wise men. And then it says, Kol asher nisa'u libo, all again that had raised up the heart, like karva'el hamalacha lasot ota. Now again, this is the second thing. This is not the collection phase. We are now in the volunteering phase. So Moshe collects everyone whose heart was elevated to come close to the work, to the creative activity, lasot ota, to embody it, to make it happen. Now, interestingly enough, Vayikhlu milifnei Moshe, these people who have just come forward and volunteered, Moshe hands over to them all the trumah that Bnei Yisrael had brought. Moshe immediately hands over to the volunteers all of the materials. Now you'll notice, interestingly enough, he doesn't ask them for an accounting. He doesn't ask them or give them any instruction. He just gives them all of the material. And they may be and they brought, and there were the donors were still bringing more every morning. There were new contributions coming in. Moshe took all the contributions as they came in and he gave them to the workers. He did not sit there and say, well, tell me what you need and I'll requisition it for you. He gave the material to the workers, let them have what they needed. Again, it shows you the level of trust that Moshe has for these people who are volunteering. And I guess conversely, it shows us the enthusiasm of the people to engage in this project for the benefit of the nation, not for their own benefit. Everybody clearly was working on behalf of the common good, this common goal, to ensure that everything would be carried out appropriately. Again, as I said, the Melech Avodah HaKodesh, there's Malacha is involved. Okay. And now we have, as I said, the only time ever in history. Okay, this is probably the only time it will ever happen, and certainly ever did happen. All of the people, everybody who was involved in every phase of the work, the creation, they all came by Yomu El Moshe Lemor, verse 5. They said, Marbim Ha'am Lehavi. People are bringing too much. We have enough. There's already enough for what we have to do. Okay, so now think about it here. you are running a fundraising campaign for the new building campaign. And your goal was the workers came, well, we got enough. We bought all the boards, we bought all the floors, we bought all the tiles, we bought all the woodwork, we bought all the bathroom fixtures. Everything's bought already. We're good. What would you do as the head fundraiser and people still want to come and give? Say, okay, not to worry. We'll make sure we'll find stuff to do with the rest of the money. Don't worry about it. That's not what Moshe does. Moshe commands and sends out a public proclamation. The donation phase is over. If you didn't give yet, you missed the boat. You were waiting to see how much was missing at the end. Too late, you missed the boat. Well, that one was pretty sure was going to happen. Okay, Moshe says we don't need any more. And guess what? Suddenly the well dried up. Nobody came and brought. However, the amount that was collected was enough for everything that had to be completed. And not only was there enough, but the Torah ends with the word vehoter. There had left over. So we see a lot of different things up till this point. Number one, we see the concept of malacha, as I said, and how it relates to Shabbat. We see the necessity of nidvat lev, of this desire to give, to be involved, to want to reach out, to participate. A, from the participants who gave. B, from the participants who gave of their talents to make. And both groups, at least from the description, seem to have been appropriately motivated. There doesn't seem to be anybody who was altruistically motivated or who was looking to make a few bucks on the side from skimming a little bit off the top. Clearly, it seems that everybody understood that this was a community undertaking, that nobody was looking to forward themselves, and that they were using talents that HaKadosh Baruch Hu had granted them in the service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That is what makes this the, I guess, unique construction project in history. Very much in contrast to, there's only one other construction project that's described in great detail in the Torah. That is, of course, the tower, which is the complete opposite of the building of the Mishkan, where a person was building this specifically for his own aggrandizement. Here, it's exactly the opposite. Everybody is motivated to be doing this because they understand this is to be for the service of Hashem. I'm just going to note one verse further on. It says, "Vayasu kol chacham lev bi'osei hamalacha." Again, there's that word. And then that's the last time it appears in our parsha, because the rest of the parsha is basically parshat Truma all over again, except it switched "you should make" to "they made" throughout the rest of the parsha.
How many times? How many times is the word mentioned? How many times is the word?
Vayasu or lasot, they made,
no.
or malacha?
Malacha.
Malacha, approximately 15 to 20 times. I didn't do a count. In all of the Torah, the word malacha appears approximately 50 times, and about 25 of them are in this week's parsha. The remainder generally relate to Shabbos and Chagim. There are one or two exceptions, but most of the time malacha appears, malachto, is either in the context of Shabbat or Chagim, where for all of the Chagim, we're told Kol Melechet Avodah Lo Tasu. Shabbos, we're told Kol Melacha Lo Tasu, as well as on Yom Kippur. But other than the concept of Melacha as something we're not allowed to do on Shabbos and Yom Tif, and the work of the Mishkan, there are about 4 other times that the word Melacha appears in the Torah in different contexts, generally to referring to things that can be things that you can do. I can do that offline, but there are, as I said, most of the time malacha appears. It's either in one of the parashiot dealing with the Mishkan, or in a parasha that deals with Shabbat or Chagim. Okay.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay. So the other thing that I wanted to go back to and focus on again is this concept of malacha as it relates to Shabbat. Fine, I just wanted to close with this, is the fact that, as I said, all too often we find malacha translated as work. When somebody says, what are you not allowed to do on Shabbat? Well, we're not allowed to work on Shabbat. And from the description that we have of the Mishkan, from the description that the Talmud gives us of the laws of Shabbat, it is understood that what we're not allowed to do is we are not allowed to create. The 39 categories, which by the way are derived midrashically, interestingly from our pasuk here that we open our parsha with, it says Eila hadivarim. Okay, Eila, the numerical value of Eila is 36. Divarim is the plural, so that makes 2 is 38. Hadivarim, the things, adds another 1. Got to get us to the 39 melachot midrashically, where that's the alliteration to the fact that there are 39 different categories of malacha that relate either to the Mishkan, the building of the Mishkan, or something involved in the service of the Mishkan, whether it was the lechem hapanim or the shemen or all the other things that had to be prepared for the service of the Mishkan. But the concept of malacha, as we see very clearly from our parsha, is taking raw materials, transforming them into something else, creating, using Hashem's raw materials of the earth that he gave us, whether it's wood, whether it's cloth, whether it's animals and their hides, whatever it is, shaping it into something that becomes humanly usable for humans or for animals, but generally for humans is the concept of malacha. So therefore, what we call work is not what's forbidden on Shabbat. Example the Gemara gives: if I have a table and it weighs, who knows how much it weighs? It weighs more than it should weigh. It's a huge table and it's on the wrong side of the room because the company's coming. We need it to be in a bigger place. You're allowed to move it on Shabbat. Oh, wait a minute, that's heavy labor. I'm working hard. It's not malacha because you're not moving it out of the same room. Whereas if I take my key, my house key, and I carry it out into a public domain, that is malacha. Why? That's a whole different question in the Talmud. And of course, it's only if you don't have an eruv, okay? And so we'll get it. We won't go into all the laws of Shabbat. Okay, well, that's a whole different discussion. The laws of eruv. Anyway, the fact is, the point I wanted to make, as I said, is that when we come to understanding Shabbat, understanding of the Mishkan is important because it is from where we derive the laws of what we're not allowed to do on Shabbat. And also the other lesson I think that I wanted to throw out for this week's parsha, which we talked about, is that the concept of nediv lev, of giving and donating and being involved in a community effort. And it's clear from the description of the givers, both of the resources and of their talents, that if we are improperly motivated and are giving for the wrong reasons, the project isn't necessarily going to succeed. Whereas if we are motivated for the right reasons, giving for the right reasons, participating for the correct reasons to further the project that is needed by the community, then we can at least hope for success. We can't guarantee success, but we can at least hope for success. Whereas if we have people all pulling in different directions, there is no hope for success. So I think that the parsha, as I said, in addition to all of the lessons of the Mishkan individually, those are the lessons that are specifically embedded in our parsha. And I hope that we can use these lessons to move forward in our volunteerism, whether it's, again, giving of our time and the talents, or giving of our money and our resources to further all of the needs of the community and all of the needs of Klal Yisrael. And ultimately, through helping others, we raise everybody up so that we can all be in Orla Goyim and be Zochet to Gula Shleim Her V'Yameinu. Thank you all, and I open the floor for questions, comments, and feedback. Marcia.
Small question. You mentioned specifically that volunteering to do the spinning and maybe the weaving. I'm not so sure about that. Does that basically imply that the other trades are basically the ones that the women are volunteering?
The women are specifically singled out for the spinning because at that point in time, they were probably the experts at it. I would assume that they were much more expert at it because they were the ones, the husbands would, remember, the husbands had all been slaves. They were busy working for power. They didn't have time to make clothes for the kids or room dividers or whatever, tent, whatever. They were busy brick making and what have you. As a matter of fact, I would have, the women are singled out specifically because that's a unique talent, I think, that they had, whereas some of the other talents probably were not as prevalent. I don't know that the slaves had a lot of gold and silver to deal with until they, asked the Egyptians for it and then left. So I don't know that they had a whole lot of goldsmiths and silversmiths. I don't think they had a guild there of goldsmiths and silversmiths, certainly while they were in Egypt. Woodworking, maybe. I don't know how much wood they have. How much wood does Egypt have? Egypt doesn't have wood. It's a desert. Trees don't grow in Egypt. So how would they have, had wood to be woodworkers and carpenters? So the fact that they found these skills in anybody, I think was, or some of them, was pretty not normal. Was pretty, I think it's pretty miraculous. That's me. People who were slaves, all they knew about was making bricks and mortar for years, their whole lives. And now suddenly they cross the sea and suddenly they're great craftsmen in metals and in woods and in leather making. I don't know that they had time to do that when they were in Egypt. Go ahead, Moshe. Follow on.
But they had
all of the things are collected. Remember, if you go back to the Exodus story, Hashem tells Moshe, it's interesting, Hashem tells Moshe to tell everybody before they leave, a week before they left, he's already told them, you've got to go ask your neighbors for gold and silver and clothing. That was already part of the deal, that they couldn't leave until they asked. That was done all before they left. So they had it all packed up and ready to go. So the fact that they had to rush and didn't have time to bake bread, that's one thing. That's one. They were busy packing all the gold and silver and collecting it all, and busy and bringing their korban pesach and all sorts of other things. But no, the Torah specifically does tell us where they got the gold and silver and the fabrics from. It doesn't quite tell us where they got the jewelry from and the wood from. And then the Midrash sort of fills some of those holes in. I think we talked about that a couple of weeks ago in terms of where the wood came from. Okay. Any other questions, comments? Anybody on the Zoom? Is anybody still there?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I hope everybody stays healthy, has a good week. And Be'ezer Hashem, we'll see you all next week.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.